Well, good evening. I'm Ken Bernhardt, and I'm the new chair of the board of the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta. Those of you that have been around for some time are used to seeing Michael Kay up here. Hi, Michael. Michael's just finished a 3-year term as being chair of the board, and I have big steps to follow as being the current chair. So role tonight is to welcome you to our annual donor appreciation event. We're thrilled that we have such a wonderful group here tonight at such a terrific venue. So, I, like most, if not all of you, are also a donor at the Community Foundation. I've been a donor for some time. This is my 5th year on the board. One of the things we want to do with your help is to increase the visibility of the Community Foundation over the next couple of years. We have some visibility for the wonderful things we and you do collectively, but if we can raise the visibility and attract more donors, we can do even more. So that's sort of my goal for the next year or two, is to be able to attract more donors, which will raise more resources and enable the Community Foundation to have even more impact than it has now in making our community a better place to live and work and play. So, as a donor at the Community Foundation, you know we're here to be your personal philanthropic resource. Your, in Alicia's words, philanthropic GPS. We recognize that all of you have passions that differ, but the passions that inspire you to give in the ways that are unique to each of you. And our role is to connect your personal passion with the critical issues and the organizations in our town that are having impact. I love the slogan. As a marketer, I'm a marketing professor down at the Robinson College of Business at Georgia State, and I love the slogan, which is connecting passion with purpose. And I think that summarizes very well what the Community Foundation is trying to be, connecting your passion with a purpose to improve the quality of life in Atlanta. Well, our theme for tonight is inspiring philanthropy with the gift of storytelling. A strong connection, as you know, exists between philanthropy, storytelling, and legacy. So much of what inspires us is based on stories that are shared throughout our lives. I'm sure so many of you have shared your stories about the ways your family, your faith, or your experiences growing up have shaped who you are and where you want to give with the resources that you have. The history of the past is what guides many of us when we consider our interests in improving the community that we live in. So tonight we explore the power of storytelling. Think about the stories you've shared with loved ones and they've shared with you. The Community Foundation staff is very adept at helping you share your stories and translating that passion into giving and legacy. Each of you is a philanthropist because you want to make a mark on your community. The Community Foundation is here to help you make a difference today and tomorrow. So we thank you for joining us tonight and for your continued commitment to the foundation and to philanthropy in general. Let me take a moment just to recognize several of I think there are 5 other fellow board members who are with us tonight. They give a lot of their time to this effort. I'd like to acknowledge their presence. If you'd stand when I call your name. Brian Friedman. Brian. Michael Kay. I think I saw Michael over there. Donata Russell Major. Where's Donata? Okay, good. Hello. David Satcher. And Jeannie Wright. Where's Jeannie? Good. Thank you. All right, now let me introduce the president of the Community Foundation, the one that does all the work, she and her staff, who will share some remarks with you. Alicia will then introduce Arthur Jacobus, who's executive director of the Atlanta Ballet, our host, and then introduce our keynote speaker, Dave Isay, founder and CEO of StoryCorp. So thank you for coming. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Ken, and thanks for your leadership of the board. It's so wonderful to see so many people here tonight. There's a number of donors that have not been able to attend other events, and so it's such a pleasure that you're here. And let me say a special thank you to our donors for your support of communities near and far. Last year, the Community Foundation, you, made $99 million in grants to nonprofit organizations in the region and beyond. 87% of those grants came from donor-advised funds. So it really does show the passion and commitment of our individual and family donors. This year, we've witnessed several natural disasters, and you've been so generous in supporting relief efforts, particularly the tornadoes that devastated North Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. Donors have given over $600,000 to nonprofit organizations that were responding to relief efforts. And know that we're here to help you in any way as you think through how you can make a difference with those kinds of calamities that occur. We continue our efforts to address critical issues and focus on what matters to you most. And we've invited you to several different events this year, one of which focused on social innovation and social venture philanthropy, and we're exploring new ways of giving with high-impact organizations. And we're convening a working group of donors to advance our work in this area on June 21st. And if you didn't even attend that but have an interest in that, please talk to your philanthropic advisor, because we certainly can get you involved in that. We focused on issues around health care. Dr. Satcher helped us with one that looked at aging. And we've had a wonderful historical overview of philanthropy in the region and the legacy that was developed by 3 terrific Atlanta families, including Danita, so we thank you for that. As the summer approaches, we'll host our annual Planet Philanthropy event on August the 20th, which is a special opportunity for the next generation, your children, grandchildren, and special friends, to come together and learn in a collaborative, fun way. This year, we've developed a special guide for philanthropy for children. It includes a workbook as well as highlights of top nonprofits chosen by your children. We have copies available as you leave, and the guide is also available on our website. Our competitive grant-making program, Common Good Funds, continues, and just last month we awarded $648,000 to high-performing organizations in the region. And we're also continuing to work on our work around organizational partnerships, helping nonprofits consider various different methods of working together, and with our nonprofit effectiveness program to strengthen nonprofits. We do a lot of other work in the community besides just grant making. We're helping to launch Neighborhood Nexus, which is a comprehensive data system that will be available to everyone in Atlanta, community leaders, nonprofits, so we're all operating from the same data source as to what's happening in this community. We continue our Grants to Green work. It's a donor-initiated program where a donor gave us money to be able to help nonprofits to green their buildings. Which is a very critical and important effort, because then they save that money and they're able to have more money to be able to use for their program and less money spent on operating cost of inefficiencies. We're continuing our work in AIDS, HIV. Dr. Satcher and Sandy Thurman chair that effort, where we're really looking forward about how can we make a difference going forward in the future to stop the spread of AIDS, HIV in this community. And last week, a number of you were at the Arts Fund Luncheon, where $500,000 in grants was awarded to small and medium-sized arts organizations. And we were so surprised when Mayor Reed stood up and said that he was restoring the funding to the Office of Cultural Affairs at the City of Atlanta at the luncheon, which was quite a momentous moment and sort of gave a real jump to the whole event. We are on Facebook, and we encourage you, if you or your children or others are on Facebook, to friend us so that we can share information with you. We have a number of members of our staff here tonight, and rather than introduce each one, if you could just raise your hands, please. The wonderful Community Foundation staff. And if you need anything around your giving, please connect with them before the evening's over. I'd like to say a special thank you to Arthur Jacobus, Executive Director of the Atlanta Ballet, for hosting us tonight. Isn't this an amazing place? I mean, it is absolutely amazing. And so, Arthur, we'd like to invite you to say a few words of welcome to us.
On behalf of the trustees of the Atlanta Ballet, I welcome you. You're in the Michael C. Carlos Dance Center, the home of Center for Dance Education and the Atlanta Ballet. And this building was essentially nearly done by the time I arrived here in December of 2009. It was the result of a capital campaign for around $15 million. That was essentially done when I arrived. And so I've been able to reap the benefits of the hard work of those who came before me and the wonderful board that we have. And so what I set out to do when I first got here was to put together a strategic plan to try to take the Atlanta Ballet in a direction that I thought could build sustainability and stability. And the stability, so we added another $4.5 million to our campaign because we'd essentially met our goal. And we did have some important work to do in those two areas. And so we added another $4.5 million to the campaign. And we're now, we have about a $19.5 million goal, of which 15 we have raised, actually a little more than that. But the stability piece, we put into this campaign, into the strategic plan, capitalization of the company. Cash reserves, endowment, facility reserve, artistic working capital reserve, which we now call the Innovation Fund, and things like that build a sense of stability for the company so that when the unexpected happens, like the roof falls in or a big opportunity like the Twyla Tharp program comes up, you don't have to worry about draining the ongoing operational resources in order to either take care of those emergencies or to take advantage of the opportunities. And so stability through capitalization, and we're into that right now. The sustainability piece is through improved operations, and we feel that, of course, improved operations means more ticket sales and more fundraising. But we felt that at the very heart of that strategically was to distinguish ourselves artistically. To be a vanilla regional ballet company that's doing much the same stuff that every other regional ballet company is doing does not distinguish us. So we chose to take the route of the creative process. And we're engaged now in a very vigorous program of commissioning new works by up-and-coming, mid-career choreographers and masters. And so we just finished a season that gave a little hint of what's to come. We had a very successful program of new works at the Alliance Theater this May, and it was very well received. It was very innovative, and it began to distinguish and identify who Atlanta Ballet is and who Atlanta Ballet is going to be. This coming season, the catchphrase on our marketing material is "Here, Now, in Atlanta." And we're bringing Wayne McGregor, who is probably the hottest choreographer in Europe. He's going to be doing something for us in October. We have Twyla Tharp, an icon in the dance community, doing a full-length ballet for us, which we'll present in February. We're doing that in partnership with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. And she's only done one other full-length ballet in her 50-year career, and that was about 10 years ago for the Royal Ballet in London. And so this is a milestone in the world of dance. It has already gained the attention of the New York Times and other very influential press outlets. And so we're looking forward to a lot of recognition for that. The recognition is not for recognition sake, and it's not for ego. It's, we want to build an audience here in Atlanta that is proud of, appreciates, and will come to our performances and will donate to the company. And sometimes it takes outside influencers to convince local people to come and check out what you're doing. And so that's part of the overall strategy. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to do the Twyla Tharp project, but it fits in so well with our basic strategy. It just kind of puts it on steroids and moves it ahead faster than you could otherwise. And then we'll always do a full-length ballet for the traditional people, and then we'll always do the the Alliance Theater New Works program. So that gives you a little idea of where Atlanta Ballet is going. We've made a lot of progress. I think we've raised our profile already. We've gained a lot of very positive public opinion. And so that's what we're up to for the foreseeable future. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Arthur. You're speaking our language when you talk about strengthening nonprofit organizations. Now, if you've ever listened to StoryCorps on NPR, you're in for a special treat. I'm so glad that Dave Isay was able to fly down from New York to be with us because he is leaving his 5-week-old baby, and many of us would be hesitant to do that, but he's flying back tonight. I'm a big fan of StoryCorps, and I listen twice a week. I listen to both the national and the local clips on StoryCorps, and we're so glad that StoryCorps has a permanent presence in Atlanta. And with the special help of one of the donors to the Community Foundation, they were able to provide critically needed funding to keep StoryCorps Atlanta alive for another year. And so when you hear that on there, brought to you by the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, it's because one of the donors who wishes to remain anonymous was able to put up the money to make that happen. And this year, we're partnering with StoryCorps to record the stories of our community partners. It's the 20th anniversary of the Neighborhood Fund, so we're making sure we have a special emphasis on getting some of the neighborhood leaders engaged in telling their stories. It's the 30th anniversary of AIDS HIV, and so we're making a special effort to get some of those stories recorded. And as you are donors, we have a project called the Giving Project, and we're really encouraging donors to tell their stories with their kids, to talk about philanthropy and what it's meant to the family. And there will be an opportunity at the end if you want to sign up, and your philanthropic advisor will help you get an appointment. Because these stories are kept at the Library of Congress. Some of them are clipped and done on the radio, but very few. But mostly it's that you have a copy of that story to share with your loved ones, and there's a historical record of that. I did a StoryCorps interview with Leslie Grady, our Senior Vice President of Community Partnerships, and it was so much fun. Of course, both of us were talking at the same time, so I'm not sure that there ever was really a record of anything. But anyway, if after tonight you want to do a story, you're so moved by Dave, we can help you do that. It gives me great pleasure. Dave is the founder and president of StoryCorps and the recipient of numerous broadcasting honors, including 5 Peabody Awards and a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. He's the author and editor of numerous books that grew out of his public radio documentary work, including 2 StoryCorps books, Listening is an Act of Love and Mom, A Celebration of Mothers from StoryCorps, which is both New York Times bestsellers. And please know that we are recording this evening's presentation so that we can make it available on our website to donors who weren't able to be here. Dave, the podium's yours.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and honored to be here. And I want to start by thanking you all for the intrepid, beautiful philanthropic work you do for Atlanta. This will be pretty informal. I'm going to play some stories until you guys throw me out of the room. I have lots of stories. And I'm happy to answer questions also. Let me start by just asking you all a question. Who here has anybody here participated in StoryCorps other than Alicia? Okay, good, a couple. And who listens to StoryCorps on public radio? Okay, wow. And who's never heard of StoryCorps? Okay, and you have no idea why I'm up here and why you've been dragged to this thing. I know. Well, let me tell you, Alicia hinted at what it is, but let me tell you what StoryCorps is. Very simple idea. It started almost 8 years ago in New York City. We opened a booth in Grand Central Terminal where you can bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story. You could bring a brother, your mom, a friend. You bring, say, your grandmother to this booth, and you're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps who brings you inside this booth, and you sit across from, say, your grandma at a table. The facilitator's in the corner in front of 2 CD burners. Door is closed. The lights are low. It's this kind of sacred space. And you have a 40-minute conversation. Most people ask the big life questions. How do you want to be remembered? What are the most important lessons you've learned in life? We go through a lot of tissue in the booth. A lot of people start crying immediately the minute that the microphones are turned on. A lot of people think of it as if I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to this person who means so much to me? And at the end of the session, as Alicia said, 2 CDs are burned. One goes home with you. The other stays with us and goes to the Library of Congress, so your great-great-great-great-grandchildren can someday get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. And I'm going to I'm going to start by playing something I actually haven't played in a while. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of StoryCorps and play a story that was recorded in the first months of StoryCorps in Grand Central Terminal. As Alicia said, I'm going home to this. I'm a Brooklyn person. StoryCorps was in Manhattan. I'm going back to Brooklyn tonight. This is a thick Brooklyn accent, but hopefully you guys will be able to interpret it. This is a couple who came to the booth very early on. His name was Danny Perasa, and he was an OTB clerk. OTB was off-track betting in New York City. It closed down a couple of months ago. And his wife, Annie, is a nurse in Brooklyn. And they came to StoryCorps to tell the story of their first date, which had happened 25 years before. So I'm taking you back to week 1 of StoryCorps in the booth, Danny and Annie Perasa telling the story of their first date, and that's track 1.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning, I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind, and she hadn't. And every year on April 22nd around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far, the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me every morning.
The only thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather
and
report.
I love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
So Danny and Annie fell in love with StoryCorps. We fell in love with Danny and Annie. I mean, I think they personified so much of what we believed at the beginning of StoryCorps, and we believe even more strongly now, the power and the poetry and the grace and the voices of everyday people when we take the time to listen. Danny and Annie came back to the booth many times. Danny brought every character he'd ever met in his life, major league umpire, undercover drug enforcement agents. And Danny and Annie came back over and over again to read their love letters to each other. It got to the point where Danny would call our office on a Friday and say, you know, I'm having a cataract operation later today. Do you need me to come in on Monday and document it? And we'd say, sure, Danny, come on in, whatever you want to do. Danny and Annie were not people who you would peg as great romantics. Danny was about 5 feet tall. He was bald. He had crossed eyes. He had one tooth. But he had more romance in his pinky than all of the Hollywood stars put together. He was an extraordinary man. And StoryCorps meant a lot to him. His story was broadcast on the radio. And what happens with StoryCorps is we do these 40-minute interviews, and we excerpt one story a week for broadcast on NPR, which is heard by about 14 million people on Friday mornings. Danny was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer several years ago, and he got very sick very quickly. And we dedicated, about a week after his diagnosis, our New York City, our Grand Central booth to him, which became the Danny and Annie Perasa StoryCorps booth. And about a week later, Danny asked if he could record one final interview with Annie. And he was too sick to get to the booth, so we went to his house. And Danny was laying on a couch, and Annie was sitting next to him. And this is what happened in that interview. So this is Danny and Annie Perasa in their house in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And that's track 3.
The illness is not hard on me. It's just, you know, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen, even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
You know, he has everything planned, you know.
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess the way, because when we were, you know, your brother takes you down, your father takes you down. She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? You know, to support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.
So Danny recorded that on a Thursday, and the next Friday it aired on public radio, and Danny died about 2 hours after the broadcast of the radio program. Annie received thousands and thousands of condolence letters from public radio listeners. She made a copy of them. She buried one copy with Danny. And still to this day, all these years later, she reads one of those letters from a public radio listener instead of the letter that she would have gotten from Danny. So Danny and Annie sort of became the grandparents of StoryCorps and set us on our path, which has continued and spread. We've actually recorded about 35,000 stories across the country now with about 70,000 people. And again, there's two sides to StoryCorps. One is this interview experience, which I think is so powerful because listening to someone, asking them about their life, who they are, what they want to leave for their children is a very powerful way of saying how much they mean to you, telling them that you love them. And then I think these stories that we hear, which are from such a diverse group of Americans, every age, every rich, poor, across the political spectrum, when you hear these stories, you're probably going to hear a little bit of yourself in the voice of someone who you may have thought was very different than you. And just for an instant, you're going to walk in their footsteps. And I hope recognize that there's a lot more we share in common as a country than divides us. And that if we spend a little less time screaming at each other and a little more time listening to each other, we'd be a better and stronger country. When we launched in Grand Central, we became national about 2 years later, where we launched these Airstream trailers that started traveling the country, and we've been to hundreds of cities. And I picked a story to play that I heard about a month ago when I was doing a lecture in Wisconsin. And I'd never played this piece before, and I'm going to play it for the second time today, just because it very much personifies StoryCorps interviews for me. It's a very typical StoryCorps interview. But again, the poetry in the voice and language of this man. His name is Lyle Link, and he was 90 years old. He was interviewed in Wisconsin by his granddaughter, whose name is Carly Dreyer. And he wanted to talk about growing up on his family's dairy farm in Wisconsin. So this is Lyle Link talking about growing up in Wisconsin, and that's track 7.
My father believed that any man that needed a vacation should get a different job, because for him, Those 110 acres was the whole world, and he needed nothing else. But farming wasn't for me. I wasn't happy picking corn or shoveling manure, although milking cows was good because I could sing opera in the barn milking cows, and that was great.
It sounds like you were the black sheep.
Yeah, I drove my poor father nuts. He couldn't understand me. I remember his saying one day, "Son, you cannot think the thoughts you think." My brother was totally a farmer. He never made another footstep that my father hadn't made before, and I couldn't walk in my father's footsteps to save my soul. So the day came, I left.
Tell me about how you met Grandma.
She came to the church that we attended, and I said to her, "Someday I'm going to ask you to marry me." And I took her hand, and it went from there.
You and Grandma had so many adventures in your lives.
You bet.
Your honeymoon was just driving across the country.
Yes, I had a 36 Chevy, and I was able to lay a mattress in the back seat. And we spent our first night in that car on a bluff over the Mississippi River. My father, by the way, did not approve of that kind of outrageous living. But I was willing to break new ground. And your grandma really was ready to break new ground.
Yes. I know that it's hard to talk about Grandma, but what made you love her so much?
I don't know. I don't know. It was something I couldn't help. We have been in love for almost 70 years, and she now died, and all I can say is that life was so beautiful.
Is.
It is so beautiful. I'm terribly, terribly lonesome.
She was pretty amazing.
Very, yeah.
Do you have any regrets, Grandpa?
No. Well, no, we lived a wonderful life. I think when we got married, we made all new tracks, and we never stepped in any old tracks. I want you to do the same thing. Live with courage.
I think because of the nature of what happens in a StoryCorps booth, it's very much of a transmission of wisdom project. And, you know, I hear that last line, live with courage. And I don't think there's nothing else you need to know in life but what Lyle Link said there. StoryCorps has a deep relationship with the city of Atlanta. Atlanta was one of the first cities that we came to on our mobile tour. What we've done over the years is launch a series of special initiatives through StoryCorps. StoryCorps is a general oral history project that gives as many people in the country as possible the chance to have this experience. But we've also focused on particular groups. Our first special initiative was with 9/11 families who come to the booth, every family who lost a loved one on September 11th to remember that person. We have a Latino initiative. We have an initiative for families who have someone who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And several years ago, we launched something called the Griot Initiative, which is an African-American initiative, which now stands as the largest collection of African-American voices ever gathered. But it started here in Atlanta. And one of the most wonderful nights of my life was coming down to Atlanta after the first month of recording with the families who'd recorded and sharing those stories back with the families. And one of the people who was at that griot reception was a man named Lynn Weaver. And Lynn Weaver came to StoryCorps to tell the story of his father. Lynn Weaver's father was named Thurman Weaver, Ted Weaver. And Ted Weaver was a janitor and a chauffeur in Knoxville, Tennessee. And Lynn Weaver wanted to pay tribute to his dad, to his daughter. So this is Lynn Weaver remembering Ted Weaver, and that's track 9.
My father was everything to me. And it's actually kind of difficult talking about him without becoming very emotional. Up until, he died, every decision I made, I'd always call him. And he would never tell me what to do, but he would always listen and say, well, what do you want to do? And he made me feel that I could do anything that I wanted to do. I can remember when we integrated the schools that there were many times when I was just scared. And I didn't think that I would survive. And I'd look up and he'd be there. And whenever I saw him, I knew that I was safe. You know, I always tell you that your mama is the smartest person I've ever met. But I think my father ranks right up there as brilliant. When I was in high school, I was taking algebra, and I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to do my homework. And I got frustrated, said, I just can't figure this out. So my father said, what's the problem? He came by, he said, what's the problem? And I said, that's just algebra. And he said, well, let me look at it. I said, Dad, they didn't even have algebra in your day. And I went to sleep. And around 4 o'clock that morning, he woke me up. He said, come on, son, get up. He set me at the kitchen table, and he taught me algebra. What he had done is sit up all night and read the algebra book. And then he explained the problems to me so I could do them and understand them. And to this day, I live my life trying to be half the man my father was, just half the man. And I would be a success if my children loved me half as much as I love my father.
The day after that griot event at the King Center, I received an email from Lynn Weaver. He wrote, Mr. Isay, you'll never know how honored and touched I was by the playing of the remembrance of my dad. After I got home, I realized that the evening of the StoryCorps griot reception was the anniversary of my father's death. Even in death, he continues to embrace me with his love. This project has touched me more than you'll ever know. Signed, Lynn Weaver, Chairman of Surgery, Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. And I know some of you know Lynn. And I would be so bold as to say that Ted Weaver, the smartest man that Lynn Weaver has ever met, the janitor and chauffeur in Knoxville, is the kind of person that we should be building statues to and honoring and holding up to our children as examples of who they can and should grow up to become. I'm going to play a story, another Atlanta story that I've never played this before, and this was aired. We were lucky enough about a year and a half ago to open our southern hub in Atlanta at WABE, and we've recorded more than 1,000 stories here in Atlanta. We have 3 permanent hubs. One is in New York, one is in Atlanta, one is in San Francisco, and as Alicia said, we are open now through the generosity of an anonymous donor and through the generosity of the Community Foundation. And it is one of the jewels in the crown of StoryCorps. It's an extraordinary, it's been an extraordinary success for us. And just to give an example of kind of the breadth of the stories that come through the booth, earlier this year, we knew that the 25th anniversary of the Challenger explosion was coming up. And we went through our archive of the 35,000 stories to see what was there. And it turns out that a man named Carl McNair had come to our booth in Atlanta. And Carl McNair had come to remember his booth, Ron, his brother, Ron. Ron was the second African-American to fly in space on the Challenger in 1984. And he was one of 7 astronauts to die when the Challenger exploded in 1986. So on the anniversary of the Challenger explosion, we played Carl's memory of his brother, Ron. He wanted to talk about growing up with Ron in Lake City, South Carolina. That is track 11.
When he was 9 years old, Ron, without my parents or myself knowing his whereabouts, he decided to take a mile walk from our home down to the library, which was, of course, public library, but not so public for black folks when you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because they were white folk only, and they were looking at him and said, you know, who's this Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She says, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm going to call the police. So he just propped himself up on the counter and sat there and said, I'll wait. So she called the police and subsequently called my mother. Police came down, 2 burly guys come in and say, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to the little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. He says, man, what's the problem? So my mother, in the meanwhile, she was called. She comes down there praying the whole way there. Lord Jesus, please don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, what's the problem? Well, he wanted to check out the books, and you know your son shouldn't be down here. And the police officer said, you know, why don't you just give the kid the books? And my mother said, he'll take good care of them. And reluctantly, the librarian gave Ron the books, and my mother said, "What did you say?" He said, "Thank you, ma'am." Later on, as youngsters, a show came on TV called Star Trek. Now, Star Trek showed the future where there were black folk and white folk working together. Right. And I looked at it as science fiction, because that wasn't going to happen, really. But Ronald saw it as science possibility. Mm-hmm. You know, he came up during a time when there was Neil Armstrong and all of those guys. So how was a colored boy from South Carolina wearing glasses, never flew a plane, how was he going to become an astronaut? But Ron was the one who didn't accept societal norms as being his norm. I mean, that was for other people. And he got to be aboard his own Starship Enterprise.
I should note that the morning that we played that story, the library in Lake City, South Carolina, was renamed the Ronald McNair Library. I'm going to, StoryCorps is an audio project. It's just microphones in the booth. I used to be a public radio producer making documentaries, and I'm in love with the power of the human voice and the intimacy. And you know, when you're driving in a car and you've got one of these people, and most people listen to the radio in the car, when you hear these voices, it's almost like they're whispering in your ear. They're right next to you. And as you hear from these stories, the power of an authentic voice, it just kind of cuts right to the heart. And a lot of people talk about crying when they hear StoryCorps stories. And most of them actually aren't sad, although I played a couple of sad ones here. But I think the reason that people cry is that it's hearing an authentic voice, and we're surrounded by so much phoniness now, it's sometimes hard to tell what's real and what's an advertisement. And we're also hearing kind of humanity at its best. And when you hear people speaking of their highest self, you're walking on holy ground, and I think that becomes a very emotional experience for people. So I have always been committed to having StoryCorps be an audio-only project, but part of what we're doing in the future is pushing into schools. We want to get into high schools and have kids both experience the StoryCorps stories and learn how to do these StoryCorps interviews. And I realized we had to have a visual component, almost as a gateway drug, to get kids involved to get kids attached to these stories. So we have done this heretical thing of going onto public television and animating some of these stories. And I'm going to play you just one very brief one, because it takes place in Atlanta. If we could just kill the lights. This is, famous people don't participate in StoryCorps. But we did have one famous person participate, who was Studs Terkel, who some of you may know was the great oral historian from Chicago. You'll hear a little bit about his doing the interview here, but this story he tells takes place in Atlanta, so I thought I'd share it with you. It is called The Human Voice.
What has happened to the human voice? Vox humana, hollering, shouting, quiet, talking, buzz. I was leaving the airport. This is in Atlanta. You know, you leave the gate, you take a train that took you to a concourse of your choice, and I get into this train, dead silence, few people seated, all standing. Up above you hear a voice that once was a human voice, but no longer. Now it talks like a machine. Concourse 1, Fort Worth, Dallas, Lubbock, that kind of voice. Just as the doors are about to close, pneumatic doors, when a young couple rush in and push open the doors and get in. Without missing a beat, that voice above says, "Because of late entry, we delayed 30 seconds." The people looked at that couple as that couple just committed mass murder, you know. And the couple is shrinking like this, you know. And I'm known for my talking. I'm Gabby. And so I say, "George Orwell, your time has come and gone." I expect a laugh. Dead silence. And now they look at me. And I'm with the couple, the three of us, at the Hill of Calvary on Good Friday. And then I say, my God, where's the human voice? And just then there's a little baby. Maybe the baby's about a year old or something. And I say, sir or madam, to the baby, what is your opinion of the human species? Well, what does a baby do? And the baby starts giggling. I say, thank God, the sound of a human voice.
I'd be happy to answer. Does anybody have any questions about StoryCorps? Any questions? Okay, I'm going to play one last story this evening, another story I've never played before. As I said, when you do a StoryCorps interview, you're joined in the booth by a facilitator, who's someone who works for StoryCorps. We've had hundreds of them. And their job is essentially to bear witness to these interviews. And in many ways, as I said, because this is about a project about wisdom, they're traveling the country collecting the wisdom of humanity. One of our facilitators was named Lily Love, and she worked at our Atlanta booth. And she died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage last year. I wanted to play an excerpt of an interview she did with her fellow facilitator, which speaks to the wisdom that gets passed down through these interviews. And I also think that this interview reminds us of the importance, whether you do it at StoryCorps or not, and I hope that folks are inspired to come and do an interview. As Alicia said, we'd love to have you come. That's what we're here for. Bring family members. It is so not scary. It's an incredibly, I think it's a profound experience for most people. There's nothing to be frightened about in the booth. It's very relaxing. But it reminds us to do this today, not to take the time. I mean, even I myself will say, oh, I can do this interview later, I'll wait. And you don't want to wait. Do your interviews, take the time, stop. Take someone who you love to the booth and tell them how much they mean to you by looking in their eyes and asking these questions. So this is Lily Love, and an excerpt of the conversation that she had in the booth with another facilitator. When facilitators come on to StoryCorps, they always do an interview in the booth to start their term. So this is just a couple of minutes, and that is track 17.
When I was 13, I mapped out my life and made some critical decisions about what kind of life I was going to have. And I thought that at 52, I would be married with children and hopefully grandchildren. But instead, very little of that actually happened. I did get married. It didn't last. I was pregnant several times, and I had miscarriages. And so it's like designing a dress while you're wearing it. You can't really fashion a life for yourself at 13 and think that that's going to fit you for the rest of your life. So I realized I'm not going to be the wife and I'm not going to be the mother. What else is there for me? And what there was for me is to be a terrific sister, to be a wonderful friend, to be a great aunt. So I tell people the life that I have now is not the life I thought I would have, but it's the life that is perfect for who I am. And I never would have thought that when I was younger. And I don't make things bigger than what they are. I don't borrow trouble. Like people like, oh, I can't wait till Friday. You don't hear me saying that. I thank God for ordinary Tuesdays, because the ordinary days means that nothing really great happened, but nothing really bad happened either.
I think more people should live by those kinds
Yeah,
of,
thank God for an ordinary, boring Tuesday where you think this life is in a rut. I love ruts because it's predictable.
Well, let's project into the future.
I don't do that anymore. I learned my lesson about creating clothing for 20 years down the road. You don't know what size you're going to be. You don't know what's going to fit you. I have learned to just let the universe give me what it is that I need. So if I can keep it simple and I can keep it real and my family's okay, I'm okay.
So Lily died suddenly a year ago this month, and after her story was broadcast, one of the participants who had their interview facilitated by Lily sent this letter into us. And she wrote, "It's rare in this hurried world to encounter someone who instantly makes you feel significant. Lily Love was that kind of person. The more she heard about you, the more she loved you. Now, I'm a hugger," she warned at the end of the interview. "My rule is that if I record you, you're going to get a hug." Oh, what a hug it was, a soul squeezer. Lily Love was a minister of hugs, a purveyor of joy. She was God's designated hugger. She made me want to be just like her. On that day, love was shared. On that day, we mattered to each other. We embraced and became a blending of age, race, and experiences. And today, as I learn of Miss Love's passing, I weep for those who will never know her love, yet celebrate a beautiful life that made everyone she met matter. I suspect there's a whole lot of hugging going on in heaven right now. Big, big hugs to you, Miss Lily Love, signed Renee Winchester, Atlanta, Georgia. So big hugs to the Atlanta Community Foundation for keeping StoryCorps alive here in Atlanta. Big hugs to all of you for the beautiful philanthropic work you do. For reminding us all, I think what StoryCorps is all about when you get down to the core of StoryCorps is that every life matters. And I know that that's what you all are doing through the philanthropic work here in Atlanta. So thank you. Keep an eye on StoryCorps. We hope to continue to grow StoryCorps, someday to become a national institution, someday to become part of the fabric of this country, where everyone, as part of being an American, records these interviews, listens to these interviews, and that someday this will be a national institution. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your time. Have a great evening.
I guess I feel like StoryCorps is a national institution already, and I think it's just great to have you here. And I really do appreciate your vision and leadership in creating StoryCorps and making it happen, and for making there be a StoryCorps Atlanta. And I wanted to make sure that everybody knew Atiba Mbuwan is the chair of the local advisory committee for StoryCorps Atlanta. So Atiba and others are helping create the sustainability of StoryCorps Atlanta forevermore in Atlanta. We do have a copy of Listening is an Act of Love, autographed copies by Dave that are available as you leave, so please be sure to take your copy and other foundation materials. And I just want to remind you, this year we'll be back at the temple, but for lunch this time for our annual meeting on November 14th, and so you'll be getting information about that. Now stay and mingle, eat the rest of this good food and the drinks, and thank you so much, and thank you again, Dave, for being with us. Thank you.